if the messaging is very high level, more visionary, strategic, those are the messages that you're going to want to hear from, your leadership team, right? But most of the things that are changing, if they impact me, if they impact my role and how I do things, I want to hear about those from my direct leader.
Change is something that every single leader is going to have to deal with. But when it comes to the managers that I talk to, very few of them are formally trained in change management. Many of them don't even have access to resources to help them with change management, which is why I am so excited to have today's guest on the show, Jeremy Ostrowski. Jeremy is the Director of Change Management at Border States, and he has a long history of not just leading change, but in helping others enact change. And so in today's conversation, we go really deep into a very specific model of change management that I think every manager can benefit from. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, then I highly recommend that you make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you are already subscribed, first, thank you. And second, if you get anything extra out of this podcast, then please make sure you share it with at least one other person. That, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. And so with that, let's get into the discussion with Jeremy Ostrowski. Jeremy, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Excellent. I'm excited to have you here. You are in the utility electrical distribution industry. So I have one simple question for you. Why do I keep losing power here in Northern California? Can you answer that for me?
Matt, I wish I could, and I wish I had an easy button for you. I don't. Um, I can tell you that the electric situation, just in the U.S., the electric grid, as we'll call it, is super complex, and it's
Yeah,
really changing. It's ever changing. Um,
yeah,
I can tell you that I know the discussions that we have, internally at Border States, just in terms of, providing the best value for our customers and for all of us, that need these things. It's something we're always working to get better at.
yeah. It's an interesting time in all things utilities. I follow a lot of like writers and social media personalities who are all about infrastructure and all the infrastructure changes that are happening around the country right now. Utilities is one of those. I'd be interested, so you're working for a company called Border States. What does that change look like for you? How are are you servicing clients differently? Are you providing new technology? What is that? Because today's conversation is all going to be about change. So what's changing in the industry for you?
Well, uh, in the industry from a high level, I mean, the electrical grid situation, I mean, like I said, it's complex and it's ever changing, but it's really around how do we fulfill the current and future state demand for electricity. And it requires us all to do this different. I mean, it requires higher capital investments to leverage renewable energy versus fossil fuels. You'll maybe start hearing terms around kind of smarter grids. There's a lot of automation opportunities that are going to be out there, and those opportunities require different skill sets and uh, mindsets, if you will. And so for us, it's how do we partner with those customers, collaborate, have those conversations around what we can do to be a great partner to serving us all.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's just so many changes happening right now in the industry, and like I said before, it's kind of with this like foundational infrastructure that we haven't maybe that most of us, most regular people, haven't thought about in a long time. So you're in the middle of this rapidly changing industry, and your role is change management. I don't know if I've worked in an organization. I mean, every organization goes through a lot of change, but I don't know if I've ever worked in an organization that had someone to help out with change. So, what do you provide? Like what's your role when changes are happening? What kind of changes do you get involved in at Border States?
Well, it's really all across the board. Our team, it can be anywhere from kind of jumping in with a consultant mindset, working with leaders on what kind of change is happening, why is it changing, why is it happening now, uh, what does this look like, from a current versus a future state. And it's the opportunity to really talk through like where are those gaps in terms of, what are the training that we can do to kind of fulfill those things? What kind of communication are we looking at to the organization? And at the underpinning of all of that is really helping build trust and helping enable the organization to go through those changes. So could be that quick front end conversation. For some of the more, I would say, transformational changes, there's a lot more that's going to go into it. So those are going to be, you know, conducting impact analysis on the change, uh, talking through, organizational communication strategies, and what that looks like again from a training perspective. But again, trying to make sure that we're being intentional about things throughout the change. And one of the beauties of the thing that my group gets to work with is uh, trying to create a line of sight with all of these changes as well, and trying to make sure that we're kind of pointing things in the right direction.
I love that word. I think you used the term intentionality. That was what I got out of a lot of that is it's just from the very beginning, making sure that you're coming in. And I mean, for your average manager, they're probably not making big changes, even on their team, all that often necessarily. They're doing things, they're making decisions, but something that's going to require a formal change process, maybe they don't do it that often. And so that's where your team can come in and be like, hey, we do this all the time. We have all these best practices. We can help you think things through. It's just having a deliberate thought process to change. Is that right?
Yeah, and understanding that it looks, kind of to your point, it looks different for everyone. And
Mm,
our organization, we have over 3,000 employees. We're all over the U.S. We have branches all over the place, and everyone's at a different spot in the change journey. And so it's being
yeah.
mindful of where folks are at with that, and what can we do to best support them. We we have an incredible leadership team, at the organization. So I feel really honored to work with just some of those great people, um, and that's some of the questions that will come our way is, how can we help provide those resources for them to help them navigate through that. And sometimes it's
Yeah.
leveraging a framework or two on that.
Yeah, well, that was the next place I wanted to go because, like I said, a lot of places maybe don't have a formal change management person. And so what I'd love to do with our discussion is take some of the lessons that you normally provide to managers and provide them to the listeners, essentially, in case they're a manager somewhere, they're going through some change, they're not sure how to approach it. In our previous discussions, there's at least one model that you've mentioned that was like can you walk me through that model? Because I had never heard of it before.
Yeah, it's called ADKAR, so it's ADKAR. So a company
Okay.
called ProSci. I mean, this is their framework, a company that's been around for 30 plus years. It's been a tool that I've leveraged for probably the past 7 or 8 years, but
Wow.
really what it is it's a sequential model of change. And so the general thinking is that for someone to go through change, they need to be able to go through this sequentially. So A is awareness.
Okay.
I have to be aware of what's changing, why it's changing now. D is desire. I need to have a desire to step into the change, and that doesn't mean that you're doing jumping jacks about the change, but that just means you understand enough and understand what's in it for us, or for me perspective to move along that change model. And then you have the knowledge to do the change. So that's a lot of the training will kind of funnel into that. One of the big pieces is the ability. So I'm aware, I have the desire, I know how to do the change, but I have the ability to do it. So that could be
To enact it. Mm,
having the systems and tools in place to do that. It could be having a performance management process in place that aligns my
yeah.
objectives to what we're doing. And then the R is reinforcement. That could be as simple as celebrating small wins and achievements, but really, what are those things that we're going to do to help reinforce the change? So I mean, the model is simple. I love using it as a starting point of a conversation with some of the
Yeah.
leaders that, we're going to go through that, and it's identifying where are we at on in that model right now, and maybe we're at the beginning, and just kind of working through that.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to kind of walk through them one at a time. I have kind of some follow-up questions there. So A was awareness,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So so this is awareness of the, why the change is happening, what the change is. What are some common pitfalls that you see with why does that go wrong? I mean, often, if I, especially if I'm a manager, I'm like, sure, yeah, change, we got to do this. Or if any leader, really at any level,
Yep.
I'd be like, yes, let's go. They clearly know. What are some of the challenges around building awareness?
Well, there's work that needs to be at depending on the impact of the change. Um,
Hmm.
there might some of the work might need to be done on the front end in terms of making sure
Yeah.
that from the organizational standpoint that we're aligned on what we're trying to do and what that looks like. And so being intentional about doing that is really really important. Communication's hard in this day and age. I mean, you talk to five different people and the best way to communicate
Yeah.
to them, you might get five different answers. And think about the different
Yeah.
roles, from folks that we have that are out in the field to in offices. Do people have access to electronic devices? And so it's really being mindful of how do people receive that information. And so in most cases, it's not just sending an email or doing a Teams message or doing that. It's you have to be really tactful in how you do that communication piece.
So it's choosing kind of the method and the style of that communication, making sure that gets your message across. I feel like there's a memory scratching in the back of my brain around ways to identify who to communicate to as well. Have you ever heard of
Yeah.
anything, because I can't, but it's like, because there's the people who are directly associated with it, and then maybe like customers or secondary. I don't know. Are there any models around that?
Yeah, yeah. So you're tugging on my heartstrings here. So it's the kind of the sender receiver methodology. The one that I'm familiar
Okay.
with, again, is from ProSci.
Okay.
But it's really if the messaging is very high level, more visionary, strategic, those are the messages that you're going to want to hear from, your leadership team, right? But most of the things that are changing, if they impact me, if they impact my role and how I do things, I want to hear about those from my direct leader. And so that's another
Okay.
thing too, is thinking through that communication strategy. You might hear organizations talk in terms of cascading, but it's not as
Mm,
easy as that, if you're going to do it the right way and making sure
yeah.
that people are hearing about the right information at the right time from the right person.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine for a lot of frontline managers, there's a level of, even if it's some kind of like organizational change, and maybe like an email blast goes out, or there's a company all hands that goes about it, there's
Yep.
probably some reinforcement that needs to happen, even though we're still in the first step, the awareness piece, but just some reinforcement of the message itself, of the awareness itself, of like, hey, in my team meeting, maybe I'll talk about it and ask if there's any questions. And I can ask my boss if there's anything, if it didn't water flow down to me, to just kind of, I mention this all the time. There was a leadership training I went to years ago where they said managers are not communicated to, they're communicated through. And I bet that really plays a big role in this awareness piece of making
Absolutely.
sure you're passing on all the information.
Yep.
Okay. So passing on information, making sure all the questions are answered, that's a big part of the awareness piece. Desire, that was the second step, right?
Yep. It's
Okay.
this.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say desire. It's so funny because I feel like sometimes that word can be a hot topic with some of this
Yeah.
framework because I think there's a misunderstanding in it. Sometimes it's the word prompts like we have this desire for change. I mean, sometimes we're not going to desire the changes that are happening, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. And so, for
Hmm.
me, part of that conversation at the front end is, um, when we're talking through what's changing and why it's changing, it's coming to terms of also setting expectations of what makes this change successful and and using that as kind of your North Star. And so
Mm,
sometimes people they just need to know what's happening. And if you look up a ProSci ADKAR template, under desire is going to be WIIF me M, which is what's in it for me.
Yep. Yep.
I look at that as a when I'm at that spot in the model, if I'm talking through it, it's what's in it for us, what's in it for me, what's in it for the organization. Because the thing
Yeah.
is that if you understand that most people that I have worked with, if you're intentionally having that conversation and you're providing that transparency and you answer those W's, chan chances are you're going to help get there. I mean, there's case studies out there around stuff like this of huge changes that were, in some cases not that great. Uh, and it all came down to communication. People
Yeah.
got the communication and they understood that stuff. And so the desire in that case is getting them to put their foot forward and to lean into that change.
That makes sense because I mean, I think, you know, when you said, people, not everybody desires change, I would almost say like what you would get. I think if you just look at the world, most people would think nobody likes change, nobody wants change, and I wouldn't agree with that. I think nobody likes change for no reason,
Absolutely.
sure.
Yes, 100%.
And so that comes back to if you're explaining the reason, if you're explaining the what's in it for me, or I love that phrase, what's in it for us, because I do think sometimes what's in it for me can sound extremely selfish
Yeah.
and like minimizing, as if you, as the manager, if you're explaining this to your team, you have to like get in their heads and only think about their self-interest, where people are willing to hear. I mean, you can tell me if you've had this experience. In my experiences, people are willing to understand what's for the broader team, even if it's maybe not helping them directly.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that sometimes if you might have an idea of areas that might be most resistant to change. I mean, it's going to have those conversations with them or the appropriate person, on the
Mm,
front end to kind of help think through like, here's some of the things that we should be mindful of how we're going to communicate this thing. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I completely lost my train of thought there for a second, Matt, but I don't know if that answered
that
your initial question.
it no, I love it. I think we're going in a good direction with these first two steps of. So the first step is this building awareness piece of making sure everybody's all stakeholders are aware of what's happening. Then once you're aware, you have to, I love what you said of kind of think forward a little bit of like, where might the pieces of resistance be and why might they be there? Where could we run into trouble? Who do we need to make sure to talk to? And proactively communicating with them to really make sure they, even if you can't build this really big desire, like making sure you are explaining why the change is happening and what the hoped for result of the change is. So then you at least can proactively get things going in the right direction. And then the third step is knowledge. Knowledge about what? Knowledge of what the future state looks like. Like explain knowledge to me a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, I mean, that's probably going to be part of it, but it's going to be, do I understand how to do this change? I mean, that might be embedded simply
Mm,
in a communication. That communication could be something that comes out from an organizational perspective. It could be a conversation between a leader and their teams, but do they, the easiest example to use would be something like a learning management system or an ERP or some of these
yeah,
bigger, kind of system
yeah,
changes. I mean, uh, what is going to needed what do we need to do to help provide that knowledge of
yeah,
what the world looks like after the change is alive, and being able to
yeah,
do that. So a lot of times it does come back to training, and it's one of my favorite things about working in the change management arena is the partnerships with different teams.
yeah,
So at the front end we were talking about communications. I mean, I have had the honor of working with amazing communication teams, especially the communication team that we have at Border States. Just amazing. I mean, this is how we get to work together on this stuff, right? Well, knowledge is a huge L&D piece there. So if you have an L&D department or a training department or org dev department, this is an opportunity for change management to kind of have that partnership and talk through, hey, what does this look like, and what kind of experience do we want to provide
yeah.
for these teams or whatever that's going through this change. And so, um, you know, just a little bit about knowledge there, I guess. But
Yeah, and I would imagine there's a lot of, at least again, thinking back to my experiences with with change, there's a lot of thinking through putting yourself in the other people's shoes. If you're the person leading the change or you're kind of in the heart of managing the change, you take so many things for granted or you forget just how much more you know than some of the other people that are going to get impacted in this. And so I imagine around that knowledge piece, there's really taking the time to put yourself in the other people's shoes of thinking through, okay, like if I've been working on this change for 6 months, like what do I know that they don't know because they haven't been a part of this for 6 months, and how am I going to translate that to them?
Yeah, I don't. Are you familiar with the term Gemba? Yeah.
Yes. Explain that.
Yeah, so it's a continuous process improvement term. I don't know if it's specific to Lean Six Sigma. I believe so, but it's really about going to the place where the work happens. And so that example that
Yeah.
you use, especially like figuring out the knowledge piece there, it's going there, hearing how things are working, and that empathy. I mean, when you were talking through that, I was thinking empathy, right? And so there,
Yes.
that helps kind of frame up some of that stuff, and that can be done at the front end as well. And you might do a little bit at the front end to kind of really identify like, um, all the things that are changing from an impact perspective, but
Yep.
um, something really that can be impactful.
Yep. So at a practical level, I'm imagining knowledge is a lot about, documentation, making sure all that's out there. When we go to what's the difference between knowledge and ability, the fourth step?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I complete to be completely transparent, I don't think it hit me really what the true or true difference was between knowledge and ability until the last few years of my career. And to me, the best way I can describe it is that knowledge is knowing the things I need to know how to change. But when we go live with that change, how am I enabled to do that? And it might even be a little before that, but how and do I how are my priorities? You hear folks, everybody's busy, everybody's working on big things, but at the end of the day, is my work prioritized in a level where I can take that training, or where the things go live where I can commit to this. It's like, are the systems around me, and I always go to performance management, like thinking through objectives, like things that I might be measured on. Do they line up
Yeah.
with this the new way
Oh,
that things work moving forward? And I'll tell you what, in the midst of chaos and all of the change and all of the exciting things going on, it's not that people aren't trying to think of these things or to do these things. It's a significant amount of work, and
yeah.
attention again to do that. And so for me, knowledge is how you're going to do the change. Ability is having the right environment to be successful in actually doing the change.
I love that. I love that. And so much, I'm sure that's why this whole process kind of probably reinforces itself. And I'm guessing there's times where you have to kind of go back
Yep.
words in it if you as you uncover things, because like you mentioned, the performance management system, or there's the key metrics that have been set up for an organization. Maybe you forget that, oh, there's these metrics that we look at every quarter, and this change is going to impact those metrics, and unless we go change those metrics, the change isn't going to happen because people respond to metrics and what they're measured against.
Yeah, it's what we're measured against, right? And you brought up a really great point about the model too. So thank you for bringing up. It's a sequential model, right? We're going to go from left to right to go through this change. But yes, you were absolutely correct. There are times where you might go back to the A for a little bit, or over to the R, I mean, so you have to
Yeah.
have the ability to be able to kind of operate in the gray sometimes, within
Yeah.
that, knowing that we all change differently.
Yeah. And there's probably times where you're in the final stages and it's just like, oh geez, we forgot about this whole department over here. We didn't engage
Yep.
with them. And now
Yep.
you got to go back to the beginning for at least that department and kind of try to speed run them through the process.
Yep.
Um, Interesting. And when you mentioned, so the final step, reinforcement, as soon as you mentioned that, I was thinking of this. Uh, I remember years ago listening to an interview with James Carville, the like Democrat political uh, strategist,
Okay.
and he was talking about earlier years ago, whenever he's working with a politician and working on their stump speech, how very often every political candidate that he's ever worked with, they are out there on the trail, they're on their campaign, and they're just like, I can't say this again. Everybody's heard this speech. Everybody knows what I'm going to say. I really can't say this again. And he would say, no, you just keep saying it. You just keep saying it again and again and again, uh, because you keep saying it until you want to throw up saying it. Because no matter how many times you say it, nobody else has heard it. You think everybody has heard it, but nobody has actually heard it. And so I'm sure reinforcement is a big piece of that, just continually beating the drum, because no matter how many times you think you've sent the email or you've communicated the key things that you need to communicate, as you said, everybody's super busy, and such a small percentage of what you're communicating is actually getting through and landing. You can probably never reinforce these changes enough. I don't know if that's what reinforcement is intended to mean, but that's what I took it as.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because I'm laughing with you. I mean, I had a similar story with a leader earlier in my career, and he said people have to hear things 7 times, and I remember thinking that's why would we have to tell people things
That's
7 times?
crazy.
And the joke was on me, right? Because he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I laugh at myself sometimes too, is there's just so many changes and there's so many things that are happening. Um, we can only retain so much. And so
Yeah.
like it is being consistent with that messaging and being very clear and concise, about that messaging. But the other part of the reinforcement model, it's actually one of my favorite parts, is it's like recognition of accomplishments. I think it's part of the reasons why
Oh,
I'll nerd out a little bit on performance management. I'll keep talking about performance management, but I think the beauty in that process, thinking in terms of talent in general, is we're so busy that we forget all the cool things that happen. And
yeah.
so, in terms of a change, we do all of this stuff, we get through the change, we're rocking and rolling. Um, it's really easy to forget the things that are happening, and we're moving on to the next thing, right? And so, the beauty of leveraging a model like this is that you have it on paper, you're not going to forget that you need to recognize the small wins. And recognition can be kind of a hot topic, I think. But recognition doesn't just mean, people usually think it's money and money and money, and it can be way more than that, right? It could be,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's so many different ways
Oh, yeah.
to recognize great work.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's just a conversation.
Yeah.
And everybody likes to be recognized differently too. So you have to be
Yeah.
very mindful of this as well. But I'll tell you what, you can go through, if you can get to that part of the ADKAR model, and you're celebrating recognizing some accomplishments and things like that. It's never going to be perfect, but you should feel good. You've done a pretty good job at that point.
Yeah, that's such a great reminder. I love, in my mind, I'm going to remember the R as recognition and reinforcement, or reinforcement and recognition, because recognition is such an important part of reinforcing anything. Just saying, hey, good job. Hey,
Yeah,
I saw
would
what you
literally be
did.
that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for kind of walking me through that. That was really interesting. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. If you're talking to a manager, you only have like a few, 15 seconds with them, they're getting ready to go through some kind of change. What is one question that you would want them to ask, or one thing you would want them to do to make it more likely that that change is going to succeed?
Hmm. Wow, that is a really good question. Um, there's a few questions, there's a few, I guess I'd call them coaching questions, if you will.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think in terms of working, with a leader that's going to maybe be going through something like that, I think of like some newer leaders that are at the beginning of this learning journey of
Yeah.
being a people leader. It's how can I help support you? And just literally like just not saying anything else. Obviously, without context of that question that you just asked, that might be a dumb question, but I kind of lean towards um, my job as a leader is to help support you and to help, to provide this guidance on this journey
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
How can I help you? And literally kind of shutting your yapper, right? Just be
Yeah.
quiet and listening. And so you talked about being seen and recognition. I mean, I think there's a big being heard throughout all of
Yeah.
this as well. And so I guess that's the first thing that
Absolutely.
comes to mind.
I love that, because I think for any manager, yeah, wow, that's a great, for any new people, and to frame it at least how I'm thinking of it too, in almost any situation, but any change happens, you're a new people manager. hey team, this thing's happening. How can I help? And then shutting up.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's super powerful.
I thought I was maybe being too aggressive when I said shut your yapper. So I appreciate that you
No,
repeated
no,
it.
no. I love it. I think that's I would change it. I used to change it differently, but I always say if there's a new manager, people manager that I can give one piece of advice, it's always just stop talking.
Yeah,
Because I think as
or
a new
that.
people manager, you're just trying to prove yourself. After you get promoted, you're like, I'm deserving of this thing. And so you just over communicate, you over talk. Over communicating is almost impossible, but you over talk, which is getting in the way of the communication.
Yep,
Um, so just stop talking. Yeah, ask questions and then listen.
yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know we had some technical difficulties early on, so thank you so much for sticking with me. I'm really happy that we got through this. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me and I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.